It's Wednesday, July 9th, 2008, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.normal.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Stash. Glad to have you here. We've been really busy lately. Just got off the phone with a media representative from the Willamette Week, one of our local papers here in Portland, asking me for more information about the hemp aspects of the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act debuted on Monday. I'm kind of curious about how far the news of OCTA is spreading, so if you've heard about OCTA in your local news, please send me an email at stash@normal.org. So far, it seems to have spread across the Pacific Northwest, getting play in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer last I checked, but we want to see how far this spreads across the country and around the world, so please just let me know. And speaking of the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act, the co-chief petitioners of the act, Madeline Martinez, the executive director of Oregon NORML, and Paul Stanford, the executive director of the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, together as Oregonians for Cannabis Reform, are going to be live here in the studio discussing the act and discussing the press conference that we just recently had, so stay tuned for that. But coming up before that, we've got our regular Wednesday interview of cannabis science, again with Dr. Mitch Earlywine from SUNY Albany, and Dr. Mitch is going to discuss with us that recent World Health Organization report that showed that the United States is number one in drug consumption around the world. So stay tuned for that. Also, we got some kooky music for you. Cannabis Carry found a really interesting one this time, as well as your regular old news headlines and a little bit of reefer madness from Iowa's other senator. You may recall back in March we had some reefer madness from Tom Harkin. This time, some reefer madness from Chuck Grassley. Makes you wonder if they're trying to protect some of those ethanol funds, huh? All right, well, sit back and relax with a bubbler full of bubble gum, and let's get to it. It's time for your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. U.S. pot crusader Steve Cubby's conviction erased. Vancouver, British Columbia. A U.S. medical marijuana advocate who fought for 4 years to gain refugee status in Canada says he hopes to visit Canada again. Steve Cubby lost his bid for refugee status and served 40 days of a 120-day sentence in California in 2006. Last week, though, the conviction expunged from the former magazine publisher's record after he successfully completed probation. Cubby says he has fond memories of Canada and hopes to visit again. While fighting for refugee status, Cubby claimed that if he were returned to the U.S., he would be deprived of the marijuana he uses to keep the symptoms of a rare form of adrenal cancer in check. After his claim was rejected, he returned to California voluntarily and was given a synthetic form of marijuana while in custody. Well, it's good to know things are looking up for Steve Cubby, and we hope things get better and better for him and that he'll be able to go back to Canada again someday. Hawaii governor vetoes medical marijuana study task force. Senate overrides, but not House. From the Honolulu Advertiser. Governor Linda Lingle yesterday issued the last of a record number of vetoes for the year, and state House and Senate leaders could only muster enough votes to override a fraction of those during a one-day special session. The governor's vetoes will stand on bills that would have established a commission to determine whether to close or consolidate public schools, created a task force to study the cultivation of medical marijuana, and allowed homeowners to use clotheslines to dry their laundry despite restrictions by homeowners associations. Yeah, and the Senate was able to override her medical marijuana study task force veto, but there were not enough votes in the House. Think of that. The governor didn't veto medical marijuana. She didn't even veto medical marijuana dispensaries. She vetoed a proposal to create a committee to study the potential methods the state could use to distribute medical marijuana to needy patients if it ever decided to do so. Basically, she vetoed talking about medical marijuana. Fresno medical IDs for marijuana wait for ruling. Fresno County officials want a state appeals court to rule on identification cards for medical marijuana users before deciding whether the county should start distributing them. The state started asking counties to issue ID cards to medical marijuana users in 2005, nearly a decade after voters approved such use in a statewide initiative. 40 of the state's 58 counties issue ID cards, which certify that a doctor has prescribed the drug. Several medical marijuana users on Tuesday asked Fresno County supervisors to issue the cards. Some of them said they've been needlessly detained by law enforcement officials, while others said they fear arrest. Dawn Nolan of Fresno said she has been using marijuana following a 2002 crash with a drunken driver. Now disabled, Nolan worries about driving home after purchasing marijuana in Tulare County. Quote, "I don't want to see anyone arrested for something they need," she said. But Sheriff Margaret Mims asked supervisors to hold off on a decision until the appeals court rules. She said issuing the cards might encourage medical marijuana users to drive under the influence of the drug. Now that's an interesting criticism. If you give someone an identification card, it will lead to DUIs. Well, here in Oregon, we have a statewide mandatory registration card system and over 20,000 registered patients. In 1998, when the program started, Oregon had 538 driving fatalities. 233 of those were alcohol-related. In 2006, those numbers had dropped to 477 driving fatalities with just 177 alcohol-related. In 1998, there were a total of 22,578 total DUI arrests in Oregon. That's driving under the influence of intoxicants, which also includes drugs. In 2005, the number had dropped to 19,521. There are no statistics specifically for driving under the influence of marijuana that I could find, but if giving 20,000 people medical marijuana ID cards is leading to more DUIs and deaths, then DUIs and deaths from alcohol must have dramatically plummeted. Human cannabis could improve skin care. New research into the skincare role of cannabis-like substances suggests the belief that marijuana cleans the body and mind may be more than just a pipe dream. Taking a leaf out of the Rastafarian book, scientists have suggested that cannabis-like substances may hold the key to healthy skin. Researchers from Hungary, Germany, and the UK say the human body produces compounds that resemble the active ingredient in marijuana, THC. Not only are they similar, but they also play an important role in the maintenance of good-looking skin. Researcher Gerald Weissman said, quote, "Just as THC is believed to protect the marijuana plant from pathogens, our own cannabinoids may be necessary for us to maintain healthy skin," end quote. The study into the properties of endocannabinoids will be published in the October issue of the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology's journal. Oil derived from the hemp plant is increasingly being used for its moisturizing properties in creams, cosmetics, and deodorants. Big natural players such as Burt's Bees in the U.S. and Neal's Yard Remedies in the U.K. have both launched products containing hemp seed oil over the past year. Cannabis, is there nothing you can't do? The only problem with a lot of these hemp products is that anti-marijuana laws force growers to grow a hemp crop that is less than 1% THC. These plants can't grow to their full industrial potential because, as mentioned above, the THC helps to protect the plant, particularly from the UV rays of the sun. So the lotions and balms made currently from hemp are so lacking in THC that we won't get the full benefits of using hemp on our skin.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death.
Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind.
If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster of marijuana, he would drop dead from fright.
Reefer Madness.
Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley's Reefer Madness. We reported in March on Iowa Senator Tom Harkin's Reefer Madness, where he believes that using marijuana will harm, quote, the small child whose parents are so addicted to illegal drugs that they sell everything, including perhaps their own children, to obtain a fix, end quote. Well, there must be some special hallucinogen in the water, because Iowa's other senator, Chuck Grassley, has a severe case of Reefer Madness too, as evidenced by this letter received from Grassley by a fan of the stash.
Thank you for taking the time to contact me with your thoughts on marijuana. I always enjoy hearing from people back home. I must, however, disagree with your views on this topic. You see, marijuana is illegal because it is dangerous. When you smoke marijuana or use any other drug, it changes your brain. It changes the way you think, your ability to learn, and how well you can remember. Making marijuana a legal drug will not change any of this.
Oh, so now we criminalize dangerous intoxicants that affect your brain? When we ended alcohol prohibition, did that change how it makes you think, learn, and remember when you're drunk? What Grassley's alluding to is the notion that marijuana smoking permanently changes your brain, which isn't true at all. Marijuana doesn't kill brain cells, it doesn't affect your intelligence, and it doesn't alter your long-term or short-term memory. Yes, you do get short-term memory loss while you're high, but once you're sober again, your memory is fine.
Some drug users believe that their drug use only affects themselves and that they pose no threat to society. This belief is misguided. People who use drugs do so to alter their perceptions of reality. When someone is high, they cannot be as alert to dangers that are always around us, dangers such as a boiling pot on the stove, a burning candle, or even something as simple as an open window.
Watch out! Smoke that reefer and you'll burn yourself and fall out a window. Again, you have to wonder if Senator Grassley realizes that there are thousands of Iowans, quote, altering their perceptions of reality, end quote, with a six-pack, getting drunk, which is high, and failing to notice boiling pots, burning candles, and open windows.
We know that drug-using workers are 3 to 4 times as likely to have on-the-job accidents, 4 to 6 times more likely to have off-the-job accidents, 2 to 3 times more likely to file medical claims, 5 times more likely to file workman's compensation, and 25% to 35% less productive on the job. To claim that drug use affects only the user is to deny the reality that whatever we do affects those around us.
It's always fun to debunk someone who throws out statistics with no citation. My first thought is, I wonder what those stats are for alcohol-using workers. My second thought is, you want to talk medical claims and productivity? Let's go talk to the tobacco smokers huddled outside for their fourth 15-minute smoke break of the day. My third thought is, drug-using workers? Are you including meth, coke, and smack, or just potheads? My fourth thought is, any stat you can find for lost productivity, accidents, workman's comp, and medical claims are trumped in those categories by workers who drink, who smoke, who are too tired, who are injured, or who are on certain prescription medications. When someone throws out these workplace stats, they are playing fast and loose with the numbers. For example, one of these studies often cited says that marijuana users are 30% less productive. They got that number by taking the incomes of marijuana smokers and finding their incomes to be 28% less when compared to the incomes of non-marijuana smokers. Can you see the problem with that kind of analysis? Again, it's the causality problem. Does smoking pot make you poor, or do poorer people smoke more pot? Or could it be that drug testing keeps pot smokers out of higher paying jobs? Or could it be that non-smoking white-collar workers are more likely to have a scotch after work, while the staff at the restaurant prefers smoking a joint after a 14-hour shift? If we found Fox viewers to have 28% less income than PBS viewers, does that mean Fox hurts workplace productivity?
Society retains a right, and in many cases an obligation, to sustain programs that reduce, but may not be able to eliminate, the problems they are designed to resolve. Despite our wishes to the contrary, we do not live in a perfect world. This is true with respect to pollution, violent crime, child abuse, and countless other areas where there is no true hope of ultimate success in ending the abuse. In the case of drug control, absolute success isn't necessary to justify prohibition, nor is an unpleasant side effect necessarily sufficient cause to end it. We do not demand 100% success as a justification for other abuses that society attempts to place upon its fellow members. We only ask that we strive towards perfection, that we reach for ideals.
Yes, Senator, but the problem is that even by your own metrics, your attempts to control drugs through prohibition have exacerbated the problems you're claiming to solve. After 7 decades of prohibition, you now have more drugs, cheaper drugs, more powerful drugs, more drug users, more drug overdoses, and more drug prisoners. Using prohibition to control drugs is like using water to put out a grease fire. Now, you know that water puts out other fires, just like harsh laws work against other crimes. But prohibition is the abdication of the control over a market. Supply and demand work regardless if it's legal or illegal. Illegal drug use causes social ills because of the illegal part, not so much because of the drugs part. In 1900, all drugs were completely legal. You could buy opium, cocaine, and cannabis and do with them whatever you please. At that time, about 1.3% of the population were considered drug addicts. Today, all drugs are tightly prohibited. This has led to the unpleasant side effects of well-funded violent criminal gangs, law enforcement corruption, the U.S. as the world's biggest jailer, and the steady erosion of our civil liberties. And at this time, about 1.3% of the population are considered drug addicts.
After several thousand years, civilized societies have failed to eliminate murder, rape, or child abuse, nor have they eliminated organized crime, the manufacture of counterfeit money, or genocide. But no one seriously sees these failures as justification for surrender. Illegal drug use costs society at least as much as any of these social ills. Yet we do not hear any calls to legalize these abuses. Why then should we give up? Should we surrender to the criminals and legalize marijuana? No. Instead, we should do whatever we can to prevent criminals from gaining the upper hand, do what needs to be done to give our families and our friends and our neighbors a safe and secure place to live.
Wow, you've slipped into full-blown dementia sativa when you can seriously compare genocide, murder, rape, and child abuse with smoking a doobie. But if you don't have the time for this much discussion, whenever the drug warrior uses this line of reasoning that we can't ever surrender, even if we can't achieve 100% success in the war on drugs, ask them why we surrendered against alcohol, which causes far more social ills than cannabis.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
All right, time for a little bit more cannabis science. We're joined again by Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Associate Professor at the State University of New York at Albany, working in psychology department there, and one of the nation's, or probably the world's, leading researchers in the use of cannabis and other substances. So, Dr. Earlywine, welcome back.
Oh, splendid to be back.
You know, today's topic reminds me a little bit of an Abbott and Costello routine. Who says we are number one in drug use?
You guessed it. The World Health Organization, WHO, has just been part of a giant study of 17 different countries, all comparing their use of both licit and illicit drugs. And the United States, despite its draconian policies, is leading the world in use of both types.
Woohoo! We're number one. We're number one. USA. Okay. Okay. So the Americans now, is shown by this study, are using more drugs more frequently than just about anybody else in the world. Let's start with the marijuana. Where are we at as far as that goes?
So absolutely at the top. It's curious when you look at both the really young folks, under 15, and the folks 21 and under, and then the whole gang. U.S. is, again, on top in every single one. The only country that was really even close is, oddly enough, New Zealand, which also has marijuana laws, much like the U.S., and actually is one of the few that ever competes with the U.S. as far as just arrests per 100,000 citizens. So I'm afraid this is pretty damning for the marijuana prohibition argument, because here we have basically two of the countries with by far the most arrests for cannabis-related problems, and sure enough, they're the ones that also have the highest rates of use.
Now, who studied the whole world, or was it just a few countries?
Oh, it's curious. There's 17 different countries, and it's never actually all been put together like this in a single study before, and I would say this is by far the most comprehensive, and I want to emphasize that these are authors who were, accustomed to seeing write the sort of things that say, oh, prohibition is great, and we really got to clamp down on these nasty drug users. This is not as if it were, published by some of our standard left-wing scientists who were accustomed to discussing. So I really feel like these are the kind of data that even prohibitionists have to say must be pretty accurate.
Yeah, and the one thing about this study, too, that I was reading about it is how they've done studies like this in the past in multiple, in different countries, but every country always had different standards that they were measuring. So it was like apples and oranges. You couldn't compare one to the other. And this study cures that, right?
Exactly. And in fact, in the past, some of the debates about comparing the Netherlands to the U.S. have really centered on this hair-splitting, oh, we asked about 18 or under, and you asked about 17 or under, so who knows? But in fact, here the data are gathered in exactly the same way, and the Netherlands isn't even close to the U.S. and other countries that have harsh cannabis prohibitions when you compare them, to basically how things could be if we just simply had a tax and regulated market like they do.
Yeah, and the Netherlands, of course, famously is where they tolerate the, it's not legal, but they tolerate the use of cannabis in coffee shops with limited purchase amounts, like 5 grams a piece there. And some of the other European countries as well are a little bit more forgiving, like Spain, for example, is one that comes to mind. So just in raw numbers here, what do the figures turn out for countries like Netherlands and Spain compared to the United States?
Well, the real heartening thing I thought was the Netherlands, particularly with the young users, the folks in their early teens, has one of the lowest rates, and it's probably less than half of the rates of teen use here in the United States. So this argument that, this is going to send the wrong message and teens are going to freak out and start becoming potheads or something, clearly isn't true when you compare across these two countries. And Spain, which is also, again, on the books is one thing, but how are the laws enforced is another. Spain is relatively liberal in its enforcement of cannabis policies and didn't make the top 4. Whereas Germany and France, where cannabis laws are, again, more like the U.S., are just behind the U.S. and the Netherlands as far as cannabis arrests per 100,000 citizens.
You know, and it's the hardest thing to get past a drug warrior's mind, too, or even sometimes just the general public, because they tend to think that, you know, if you don't want something, you try to stamp it out, and we have to show them that the harder you try to stamp it out, the more of it you get.
The funny thing is, there's this odd forbidden fruit effect that I think people don't quite understand. They figure, oh, if something's prohibited, we must, send the right message. But in fact, what are all the things that have been prohibited as we were growing up? Candy, staying up late, sex, all these things that are a whole lot of fun. And I think by prohibiting this so hard, we end up making it sound more alluring than it really is. And then sure enough, these data make it look like countries with harsher laws end up with, in fact, higher rates of use.
Now, the marijuana use, of course, is interesting to us here at the Stash, and we found, like you said, the United States was up there, and New Zealand was up there, and Canada and some of these other countries. But where I thought the figures were really dramatic was when we started talking about the hard drug use, the harder drugs like cocaine and heroin, and how the United States is far above the other countries in those drugs.
Well, and this is really spooky. I mean, cocaine is not a toy. It is nowhere near the safe, easily harm-reduced drug that cannabis is. So I don't want to, talk about these in the same way and give folks a wrong impression. This is really a potentially dangerous drug for an important subset of the population. And we have, of course, some of the harshest punishments for cocaine possession and cocaine dealing in the entire world, and yet we have the highest rates of use for both of these drugs as well. I'm hard-pressed to say, is it time to loosen, cocaine laws as well? I just don't know, but it seems like something comparable is going on here when you compare across these different countries.
Yeah, and the United States, what was the figure? It came out like 16% or something like that, and the next closest was somewhere around 4? Or?
Yeah, literally 3 times as much than its nearest neighbor as far as cocaine is concerned. And I mean, I'm flabbergasted by that. And I mean, with some countries, if you're talking about Singapore, where nobody's going to confess to using it, okay, I understand. But these are countries like France and Germany and Spain, places where it's the same sort of stigma, same set of biases, if you will, when people have to report their cocaine use, and yet we're way above all the other countries.
What about the the often said point by drug warriors that we can't compare countries like the Netherlands to the United States because we have a different culture, that we have that no matter, it's apples and oranges because we have a different culture, which always seems to me kind of a code word for, minorities and poverty. I mean, what do you think about that?
The curious thing is we don't see these data broken down by ethnicity, in part because some countries have different proportions of different ethnic groups. But I can't imagine that this aspect of it would account for such a dramatic difference in the rates of use, particularly of marijuana. So suppose, everybody here was non-white, then would that suddenly make everything, change that dramatically? I just find that hard to believe. Pharmacologically, these drugs worked exactly the same way. If anything, this is a sign of socioeconomic problems, and that, folks who are earning less money or who have fewer educational opportunities may be more likely to try drugs earlier in life or something like that. But again, to sort of implicitly suggest that this has to do with some kind of ethnic problem or something like that is really unfair, and I think kind of ignores some of the programs that have been in place that have basically, hurt inner city folks and made things tougher on the poorest of the poor.
Yeah, and that's a good point in that respect too. And it always sounds to me, it's the same kind of mindset that says, USA number one, and can't imagine that there's any other place in the world that's a functioning democracy with freedom and liberty. It's the same kind of limited worldview, I would say. Now, did the World Health Organization report make any recommendations or come to any conclusions regarding drug policy, or was it just the reporting of the facts?
Well, this was curious. Both in the discussion section and in the tables of this paper, it was kind of revealing. You would think the tables would naturally sort these highest to lowest, so you could see who's the highest users and who are the lowest users. Instead, they broke them down geographically, so you have to kind of sift through and can't quite see exactly who are the guilty parties, so to speak, because it makes the U.S. look kind of bad, and this is published in the U.S. Journal. But also, the discussion section really keeps it wide open. So it's like, well, we really have to consider a lot of things about different policies, but now we can finally make these comparisons. But they sort of hint at that apples and oranges argument that you've mentioned. And I think, knowing some of the authors on this paper, this may be kind of a wink at either the editor of this journal or some of the reviewers that, hey, we know what's going on here, but we can't quite come out and say this because this is a World Health Organization report.
Right. Well, like we say, we check out all the countries here where there have the higher punitive policies with regard to marijuana use, and they have more marijuana users. I hope everyone can learn the lesson from that. Dr. Earlywine, thanks for joining us on this wonderful Wednesday and giving us that excellent report.
Have a great day.
All right, you too. It's tough talking to kids about marijuana, especially if you might be a parent who dabbled a time or two in your youth. So to help you out, get your copy of Dr. Mitch Earlywine's latest book, A Parent's Guide to Marijuana. Dr. Earlywine is an associate professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and an expert on the studies concerning marijuana, its effect on health and society, and the methodology behind the statistics. He is a frequent guest here on our daily audio stash. Dr. Earlywine lays it all out without the propaganda and scare tactics that parents know won't work with teenagers. He presents a rational understanding of cannabis, what it is and what it isn't, and why kids shouldn't be using marijuana. You can order today through Amazon.com or check our links at our blog, stash.normal.org. Here at the Normal Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. Welcome to Hemp Day Hump Day on the Stash. I often find music by searching for keywords. Today, I stumbled on this amazing Khmer song by Dengue Fever, and although I do not know the meaning of the song title, Snai-Bong, this song was so retro 70s classic psychedelic camp that I had to give it a post. Dengue Fever is an underground group out of LA. They sing music based on pre-Khmer 70s era pop music. Their lead singer is the beautiful Cambodian Chom Naimal, and the video won me over. Naimal speaks little English, and the band writes some songs in English and then translate them to Khmer. With a funky bass line, a bit of rock and roll, and even a Jethro Tull flute riff, this song is fun to listen to, even with the language barrier. This track comes to you from their sophomore album, Escape from Dragon House. You can see the video and learn more about the album at our blog at stash.normal.org, where you can also get an MP3 download of this song. It's Dengue Fever with Snai-Bong.
ดารารีสรองเอาไว้อย่างนี้รอได้ไตรอ่อนน้ำตำรวจจานเสียเมื่อดวงดารารีสรองเอาไว้อย่างนี้โอนสนายบอกยังเกตาโอนสนายบอกโอนสนายประปองที่อยู่หน้ามองหาสนายตราตรายจะไหนมองมันเดินล้วนหายไปน้ำนวลเบื่อมุมอย่างนี้
Hello, I'm Casper Leach, host of Time for Hemp. Did you know that police arrested a record 829,625 people in the United States for marijuana violations in 2006? Marijuana arrests now comprise nearly 44% of all drug arrests in the United States. Of those charged with marijuana violations, approximately 89% were charged with possession only. The total number of marijuana arrests in the United States for 2006 far exceeded the total number of arrests for all violent crimes combined. Enforcing marijuana prohibition costs taxpayers between $10 and $12 billion annually and has led to the arrest of nearly 20 million Americans. We must end this war on drugs. With your help, we can. Please join LEAP, the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and become part of the solution to ending this civil war. You can do so by going to leap.cc.
All right, welcome all you wonderful Stash listeners, live and direct from NORML West Coast Media headquarters in beautiful Portland, Oregon. I'm sitting here with the co-petitioners of the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act 2010, Paul Stanford and Madeline Martinez. Welcome to headquarters.
Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Glad to be here.
So we had a big press conference on Monday, and just give you some of your reactions to some of the turnout there.
I think it's one of the best campaign kickoffs I've seen in 20 years of activism. We had 4 networks there. All of them covered it pretty prominently. We had 3 polls.
Yeah.
And we won all the polls.
Well,
I mean, they're not scientific polls.
Sure.
But it's a great start, an auspicious start.
Madeline, what do you think about, you saw some of the news coverage of it, and a lot of times we get the news coverage of they groggily gathered in the square or whatever, where they're trying to paint us as being somewhat less than a legitimate campaign. What do you think about the tone of the coverage, how all that came off?
Well, I actually thought it was really well done. I thought they did us a great service. They actually took us seriously, which I thought was a big plus because, as you say, they usually have to throw in their little jokes and smoking, smoke, and I was really kind of tired of that, and I was hoping it was going in a different direction, and it really has. All the coverage that I taped and that I was able to see was very positive, and I think the big difference was the cha-ching when they saw that $300 million potential. Conservatively speaking, that seems to have thrown all of them in, or at least gotten them to take us seriously, to say, wow, cha-ching, there's some money here to be had.
Well, it's not as if the Oregon legislature hasn't already sniffed out a little bit of that money in the past from marijuana.
Well, exactly. Over $900,000 was taken in the 2005 legislative session, and that's
from the
amazing.
medical marijuana program.
From the medical marijuana program, so that they've already touched the marijuana money, the dirty marijuana money. So
yeah,
here we go.
Now they're hooked.
yeah, exactly.
It's the gateway, right?
Yeah, it was the gateway, because here we go.
Overall, I think we all did a really good job organizing it. The way the place was designed, it looked professional. The way you see world leaders with the screens behind them and the slogans they're trying to put out, they were behind us. So that was great. And then the products that were there. We had about 30 different hemp products, everything from hemp soap to hemp body care and hemp food and hemp nut, and hemp milk.
A lot of the B-roll footage was showing, close-ups of the hemp flower and the different hemp seed oils, which was great. Now, one of the things that critics will come out and say is, well, you're wasting your time. It's against federal law. There's no way this will stand. Supreme Court will overturn it. Castles in the sky. How does OCTA differ?
We took all of that into account as the bill was being crafted. It went through a draft process of a number of years with the input of dozens of different experts referred from NORML in the past. Kevin Zeese, actually, back when he was director, we were doing some of the drafting process, and he referred us to several attorneys who were experts. And it was drafted specifically to withstand a federal court challenge, and we did that by implementing a system of controls that was mandated by the Single Convention Treaty of 1961. That treaty outlines a system of controls that if cannabis is going to be regulated, you have to follow those controls. So we think by implementing the controls of this international treaty, and in federal court proceedings, international treaties are held up with the Constitution as two of the three things that are higher than federal statutes. So, laws can be ruled unconstitutional or in violation of international treaties. The only thing that supersedes those are the sovereign, the people themselves. And in our OCTA campaign, in the preamble, which is a full third of the text, we list a number of historical, legal, and constitutional issues that give our reason for breaking from federal drug regulation. Now, is that a 100% guarantee that will be upheld in every court case? No. But if we get the right judges, it gives us a fighting chance, which is better than we've ever had before. And I think probably by the time this comes up for a vote, we can see a change on the federal level on prohibition against medical marijuana, and maybe even federal prohibition against marijuana itself if Barney Frank's bill could take off.
Well, that would be great.
Now, won't they just say, though, that, the interstate commerce clause trumps all this? The government, just like they did in the Raich case, they said, medical marijuana was interstate commerce. How would OCTA, protect against that?
Well, it's a state agency would take possession of the entire crop, and then they would license the areas and plots of land. They take possession of the entire crop. Those are things that are mandated by this treaty. Then they would sell the entire crop. So the state isn't going to be shipping it over the state lines. I mean, obviously, the state agency isn't going to be exporting it illegally. So any more than they export, our alcohol products illegally.
But isn't that the difference? The difference is that it's interstate means you're going from state to state.
Right.
And we're
intrastate. Entirely intrastate.
Where it just stays within our state boundaries. And so that, I think, would not be upheld, the Raich decision.
Yeah. And we declare the whole thing a scientific experiment to lower the misuse and illegal diversion of cannabis to the black market. And so by doing that, again, we invoke some of the wording of international treaties that give us a reason to break from federal law.
And I think the name of those treaties, they talk about drug control, and I know Rick Steves is fond of saying that, here in America, we just think you got to be soft on drugs or hard on drugs, and in Europe, they are smart on drugs, and this would be one of those smart on drugs measures. And Madeline, you kind of highlighted that, I saw in the testimony that made it to the airwaves here in Portland about how you as a grandmother are saying that marijuana is out of control.
Well, it definitely is out of control when high school kids can get a hold of it.
Yeah, and not just get a hold of it, but control the market.
Exactly.
You know, if you want marijuana, you might be better off in some neighborhoods going to high school kids.
That's what I hear all over the place, and that's my concern. You know, my grandchildren are already in high school in California, and I'd like to see those controls begin here in Oregon. I'd like to see the beginning of each of these states and going across the nation, just taking over, because the feds don't have a better program. They don't have anything better to offer us. So here we go. We, the people, are offering them up a solution to our economic woes, to the drug problem. 30 years of the same thing. It's not working.
Even more, you know, every argument goes in our favor. And when it comes to lowering the use by minors, lowering the misuse of cannabis, the fact that cannabis protects against cancer, the fact it produces 3 times more biodiesel than any other seed oil crop. We just have an amazing number of factors that bode in our direction, and there aren't any on the other side that I can really think of. The only thing they keep bringing up is sending a bad message to kids. And, you know, our studies show that it will lower the misuse by children.
Well, there's something that I always hear, and I've been using it a lot lately. It's, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Yeah.
And I think that our facts shine through, and the failed war on marijuana is proof. It's not working, and I refuse to continue to waste my tax dollars on a lost cause.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's kind of strange about going through these discussions about OCTA and ending prohibition on adults and ending arrests and ending jail and spending all that money on prohibition is that there's some people who are on our side who have this streak to them that says they don't want the government involved in marijuana at all, and that would be terrible, that we'd be, you know, ceding our natural rights to sacrament or whatever argument you want to use.
They want to see it like tomatoes.
Yeah.
I've run into that petitioning on this issue. You know, there's some people, and I think, you know, they just don't see how they can continue. You know, these are people who might make some of their money in the black market. I don't think they see how they can profit from the black, you know, state control. Now, I think they can go become a farmer and sell. You know, if they've got some expertise in growing good cannabis, maybe they could put that to use. But a lot of them, I think, are afraid. And what I hear often is, that's going to put me out of business. And what I think when I hear that is, you're too stupid to figure out how to survive in a legal environment. You have to take advantage of an illegal environment.
Well, I think that if they just sit down and think it over, they can grow the marijuana. I'm so used to saying medicine. The cannabis, sell it to the state, and they can, like you said, where's Tim Pate when we need him? Let's all be farmers.
Yeah.
Why not?
Now, speaking of farmers, that's another thing that will be something about OCTA for the rural communities, which oftentimes your rural communities in a state like Oregon are going to be more conservative and a little less socially liberal than a place like Portland.
This is where the money's going to go.
Exactly. You know, we've had the timber payments and the farm problems.
And if we can divert industrial hemp seed to biodiesel, we're going to be creating thousands of jobs and leading the way to, you know, environmentally and economically sustainable futures that, you know, replace all these toxic byproducts that current corporations have given us, you know, with global warming and oil spills and toxic waste. Hemp is the solution. And
it certainly is renewable, sustainable, environmentally sound. I mean, let's face it, it's the solution to all of our problems.
Look at the Exxon Valdez oil spill up in Alaska. If that had been hemp seed oil, those birds and the sea life would have had some valuable food. They wouldn't have been harmed at all. They wouldn't have been poisoned. It would have had a benefit for all of the plants and animals.
I can't believe that you are standing up for obese wildlife. It's getting them all.
I'm not saying obese. You know, hemp seed's very healthy.
Nutritious,
you know?
It is.
It is. And
I think that was another thing when we were there at the press conference, and some of the media there, in particular, one reporter seemed to not know very much about the hemp thing at all, and was just stunned that, you know, I remember her asking the question, well, would it grow here?
Yeah. Yes. And it used to grow here. It was a crop we had here in Oregon before it was prohibited.
Well, she was, 30 years old, late 20s maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe
she was a young girl.
Fox TV.
Yeah, well, no, I don't know. Was it Fox?
Yeah.
But Willamette Week has also they're doing a follow-up story to yesterday's press conference, and I thought that was very interesting because they're going to put something up on there.
They said they'd have something on their web. It might be there now.
Yeah.
And then a murmur. They'll have a murmur in their
Murmurs
section.
always scare me.
Yeah, as long as it's not a hard murmur.
Willamette Week is wweek.com, so we'll check that out to make sure that we can find the stories out there. And then up on the Stash blog at stash.normal.org, we've got links to, I believe, all 4 of the local affiliate stories that they posted on the web, and I think a couple of them have video, so you can check that out. Also, video of the press conference is available up on YouTube. Just check out, again, the Stash blog. We got links there, as well as links at the Oregon NORML YouTube channel. Just go to the Google. You'll find it. And let's give everyone the basic details before we sign off here. How many signatures you're going to have to get, how long.
We need 83,000 signatures. We have 2 years till July 2nd of 2010 to gather those signatures, and I think we'll gather more than enough in the given time. And then the vote comes in November 2010. So
and they say stoners never plan ahead.
I'm telling you, boy, they got mixed up with the wrong stoner because I was there. We are at petition number 2.
Yeah.
As soon as the door opened at elections, we were there with our petition, with our signatures, ready to rock and roll. And, I think they don't give us enough credit because here we are. America's roots are hemp roots, and we're returning to those roots so no other American has to die for foreign oil ever again.
Yeah, that's amen. And
we don't have to send our money off to support these monarchies in the Middle East. They just seem to be repressive and
we can be the Shaws of hemp.
Or those damn Canadian hemp farmers.
Oh no, we love those Canadian hemp farmers. They can teach us a lot.
Farmers are doing good, but they're limited to low THC hemp. They can't grow THC that's more than 1%. They can't grow hemp that's more than 1% THC. And because of that, they have to breed out the flowers in that low THC hemp. And by breeding out the flowers, they breed out the THC, but they also breed out the seed oil and the seed protein.
So the OCTA would allow them to grow even better hemp.
Yeah, much, much better and much more productive hemp. That's one of the requirements, is that they legalize hemp that produces the best quality and quantity of hemp seed oil and protein.
Well, I know that Americans in, I think it was 2002, consumed what's the equivalent of 35,000 acres of Canadian hemp demand.
I'm sure that's gone up dramatically since then.
And we could definitely provide that for our struggling Oregon farmers here. So let's give everyone the website that they can help if they want to get involved.
www.cannabistaxact.org. CANNABISTAXACT.org.
See, now we're perfectly functioning even here in Oregon. Paul Stanford is the head of the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation
and reload that pipe.
And the Campaign for the Restoration and Regulation and Restoration?
Restoration and Regulation Hemp, CRRH, is a
hemp.
long-standing political committee since 1990.
That's right. And Madeline Martinez is the executive director of Oregon NORML, and we're all here celebrating the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act. Get involved, get educated, get motivated to get it regulated. Thanks, guys, for visiting us here at NORML West Coast headquarters.
Thank you, Russ. Relax it and tax it.
Thank you.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.normal.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave it today with another one of our cannabis quotes, this one from the USA Merck Manual of Diagnosis and Therapy from 1987, which stated, quote, "Cannabis can be used on an episodic but continual basis without evidence of social or psychic dysfunction. In many users, the term dependence, with its obvious connotations, probably is misapplied. The chief opposition to the drug rests on a moral and political and not a toxicological foundation. End quote. That's right. That's what I always say. We've got the facts and logic on our side. The only thing that keeps marijuana prohibition alive is the moral issue of people just thinking that cannabis users are somehow less than human, somehow a plague on society. We can change that perception by letting everyone know that we are responsible adult cannabis consumers and they have nothing to fear from us. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.